My name is David Guest. I'm a solution architect and technology evangelist for Third Space, in effect hosting the session today. We're going to be talking about compliance protection within Microsoft 365, what we can do to make the most of that. I'm joined today by Matt Richards, who's the head of mobility and security at Third Space, and also by Nick Lyons of Microsoft, who's a security product marketing manager. So we're going to go through a few things. This obviously is the welcome piece. I'm going to be talking about mitigating data risk. Matt's then going to talk about protecting your environment and the security current state assessment. We'll talk about next steps, and then at the end we've got a Q&A session. So at this point I'm going to hand over to Nick Lyons, who's going to do the introduction.
Thank you very much for that, David. Okay, yeah, Nick Lyons, I'm the product marketing manager for security at Microsoft. That means basically I look after the security business within Microsoft. It's not just all colored pens, as you imagine from marketing in the title. Really pleased to have the opportunity here to talk to you around what's going on with security and compliance, because it is exciting times, it's interesting times. I know this is a bit of motherhood and apple pie we're presenting here, but the world has changed fundamentally. We have all seen that 2 years of transformation in 2 months, as Satya Nadella called out on our earnings call. Things are not going to go back to the way they were. We've seen businesses, we haven't finished yet on the changing. Things are going to continue to be disrupted for quite a long time. And there's going to be natural evolutions as a result of that. What we have seen is a huge rush for remote working. Even before that huge rush, it was fair to say that conventional security tools hadn't kept pace. So the idea of keeping on building out more and more layers of security with different solutions and perhaps overlapping solutions, that just gives you some headaches and counterintuitively could it actually make you less secure. Finally, with all of this that's going on, breaches are rising. We've seen people ride on the coattails of COVID and use that as the basis of phishing campaigns that have been successful. We've seen fundamentally the cost of a breach is going up and up and up all the time. And right now, my personal view is that people aren't taking much attention to compliance and regulation. People are assuming that they just need to keep their business running. We now need to get people back so they are in front of the changes they've made to enable remote working, so they can once again prove compliance and show that they are doing the right thing with data. So again, just a bit of context. And the way that we have to deliver this, and if we look back 10 years, the way you managed your network was very simple. It was your network, your devices, your identities. You had control as the IT department of everything that went on your network with your devices. That's changed. I mean, maybe even 10 years is too close a time span, because now people bring their own devices, people work with partners, there's SaaS applications out there, there's cloud being used, or other people's computers, some people like to call it. There's different networks. The fundamental point is that you now have to try and manage a heterogeneous environment of devices, identities, networks, bring IoT into the mix, and you put all that in the mix of saying, well, actually everyone's in the home office. You've got a perfect storm of a headache for security. So the way that Microsoft approaches this, and the way we underpin everything we do, and this isn't just talking about security and compliance, this is not just products I'm talking about, it's the products, it's the services, it's the solutions, and it's the way we run things, is predicated on zero trust. That to us means 3 things. It means you verify things explicitly. When someone is coming in, accessing something, you verify it's them, you verify they have access to it, you verify devices, you verify every different piece of information you can to determine the risk of that access and take appropriate measures around it. We always use least privilege access. That's, again, the solutions we provide enable you to do that. The way we run our solutions absolutely has that. So there's no standing admin access. For example, there's no standing admin access for our service engineers. They need to escalate to the level of access they need to request to meet a service. That gets reviewed and approved for a very limited time. That's just, again, one example of the way we run things. And finally, assume breach. So this idea of segmentation, making sure that we are actively looking for breaches, and we enable you to actively look for breaches too. We look for things out of the ordinary. We enable you to look for things out of the ordinary. We limit the impacts of breaches in everything we do. This, to me, is the foundation of everything we do for security, and it's our strongest advice would be get yourself on that zero trust journey. Make sure you have a plan for how to get there. In terms of what's unique about what we provide, it's these three things. It's experiences, intelligence, and integration, fundamentally. So these experiences are built in. They are best of breed, and they work efficiently and effectively, the most effectively they can be, across multiple different platforms. So not just Windows estate. Wherever you consume Microsoft services, that protection will be there. Secondly, it's this idea of AI and automation to secure your future. That means that that's the difference between a poor SecOps person being absolutely inundated with alerts of thousands and thousands of alerts per day, and instead seeing a handful of correlated incidents that correlate those alerts across multiple disparate domains. So this is the idea of bringing in people, devices, apps, and data, seeing what's going on, allowing someone to, well, doing the heavy lifting to pull all those things together, and then allowing someone to easily pivot to see what they need to do if it couldn't be automatically remediated. And the vast majority of cases are automatically remediated. That's what makes us unique. It's those three things. It's that integration, it's that intelligence, and it's the experience that we give not only our employees, but also the SecOps people, the IT team, and the dev team too. This isn't just good enough, if you like. The Microsoft solution isn't just good enough. We are a leader in the magic quadrants that count for security. So endpoint protection is coming out next week again from Gartner. Watch this space for what happens there. Enterprise information access, cloud access security brokers, access management, and UEM. We are in the lead quadrant from Gartner for all those, and we're also in the Forrester Wave for endpoint protection and multiple different security solutions too. Fundamentally, Microsoft solutions aren't only integrated with intelligence and give you the best experience, they are also class leading in their individual areas. It's when you pull them together that it starts to get interesting. Microsoft security, you'll see us talk less about products now, and you'll hear us talk about these four pillars: identity and access management. It all starts with identity and access management. And honestly, if you do one thing, if you haven't already done it, turn on multi-factor authentication at work and on your personal PCs and on your personal services you consume. It's the single most effective thing you can do to kill the majority of breaches stone dead. Secondly, we talk about threat protection. Again, big part of that is keeping updated. Threat information protection is how you achieve compliance. And finally, cloud security. And this isn't only talking about the modern work, this is talking about the Azure side of things too. This is underpinning everything we do. We don't talk too much about products. We try to talk about these pillars of solutions instead. I say that, I instantly link into talking a little bit about solutions here. This is where we drill down, and this is the depth of experience we have for these different pillars that I'm talking about here. Whether it's single sign-on, whether it's DDoS protection on your Azure estate, whether it's cloud app security brokers, or whether it's the whole database security issue that you have on potentially on your on-prem and Azure instances, or even other places, all the way through. It's the soup to nuts, if you like, of end-to-end security. So that's a quick 5 minutes on where we see the market, where we see the need for security, how Microsoft differentiates, and the sort of solutions we provide. Now I'm going to hand back to, I think it was David, to quickly talk through the information protection side of things. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Nick. So I'm going to talk about the idea of mitigating some data risk and making sure that we're doing things in the right way and maintaining things correctly. One of the things that we need to concern ourselves with here is the fact that data is exploding. There is currently an absolutely huge amount of data that's being created each day. According to a little bit of research, 2.5 quintillion bits of data are created for every single person on the planet every day. A quintillion is 10 to the power of 18, so it's a huge amount of number. It's obviously being created even more now that we're all remote working. People are having to store data more, which might be local to them. It could be sitting inside a OneDrive, it could be sitting inside SharePoint, it could be sitting in Box or Dropbox or in a database, but it's being created and stored and shared, and it's everywhere. It's no longer enough to worry about just what's on your network. You also have to worry about what's off your network. And we need to understand that in order to do something with it. Lots of organizations have no confidence at all that they know where their data is, who is accessing it, and what they're doing with that data. We need to be able to detect and prevent the loss of that data to make sure that we're maintaining our intellectual property. Any lead that we might have in a technology space or anything we might have that makes our business better at doing what it's doing than other businesses that we're competing with. If we take a look at the data within an organization, more than 80% of it is not classified. It's just a file that's sitting somewhere. And inside that file, well, who knows what's there? And if we haven't classified it, if we don't know what that data is, how can we actually govern what it's doing? How can we make sure that that data is not escaping? And the largest thing we have when we come to trying to comply with regulations is around knowing about that data. How do I know that I'm not sharing PII with people who are outside of the organization? One of the issues here, of course, is the fact that the regulations are always changing. Lots of companies, lots of different organizations around the world are struggling to cope with all of the regulatory changes. In Europe, we have GDPR, which is great. But in the States, they also have GDPR because they're dealing with data that is about European people. Each organization has to cope with the data regulations for the people who it actually employs and it's working with. Within the UK, we're currently subject to GDPR because we're still part of the European Union, sort of. But we know when we leave that the government intends to bring out a GDPR Plus to make the UK one of the best places to secure your data in the world. And this constant changing of the data regulations makes it more difficult for organizations to keep up, which means we need a strategy. We've got to have a way of making sure that we understand what our data is, where it is, and how we're managing it. If you can answer all of these questions very, very simply, then you're probably in a reasonably good place. But you're also probably in a position where you don't actually know where this data is. You have no controls to make sure that a corporate IP, very important document, isn't being stored and shared on Box or Dropbox in a private account. And that obviously is something we need to be concerned about. So we need to be looking at this and making sure that we protect and govern that data wherever it lives. Now, it would be really, really nice if we could control that data is only ever stored within things that we control. And we can do that to some extent by using mobile device management, mobile application management, linking things specifically to SharePoint, making sure that our email system doesn't send any email outside of the business. Oh, hang on a minute. That's not quite how email works, is it? We need a better way of doing this. We need a way of actually monitoring and controlling the data so that we can assure ourselves that the data is known about, it is protected when it is stored in the correct places, and it's governed. That allows us to then protect and govern this wherever it lives, because we're controlling the wherever. Unfortunately, though, we need to be thinking more about this in terms of anywhere. If we're working as an organization and we have to share some information with legal counsel who happens to be an external company, I can send them the information that they need, and that's absolutely fine. The intellectual property or the PII inside that is governed by the organizations and by the rules about how we work. But do I know where that data is anymore? Well, no, I don't. I know it's gone to the legal counsel, but I don't know what they're actually doing with it. If we actually look at that data and we apply when I add protection on, I'm no longer bothered as much about where the data is as I am about what the data is. If I protect a file to make sure that only people who work for Third Space can open it, then really, I'm not too bothered about that data existing in a file on Box, Dropbox, some other file sharing utility, a USB stick, or basically just existing on a website. Because I know anybody who tries to open that file will discover that they can only do it if they have a valid, current Third Space account. But then we need to think about how we're labeling the data. We need to think about the gearbox we have in place. Personally, I prefer driving a manual, but I drive an automatic. I like driving a manual because it gives me more control, or at least the feeling of more control. The automatic, on the other hand, takes all that pain away from me and I don't need to worry about what I'm doing with the gears. When we come to labeling, we should have the same thing. The ability for a user to define this document I'm working on is public. It's a marketing document. I should be allowed to share it wherever I want. As opposed to, this document is one I'm working on for the board, and it's going to include figures that show how well we've been doing over the past 3 months. That document may want to be automatically assigned and make sure that the protection that goes with it. And we can allow that differentiation within Azure Information Protection to make sure that we're identifying these things correctly. Now, manual labeling, we used to have a problem with in that you could only apply a label if you were running Word, Excel, PowerPoint, or Outlook on Windows. Fortunately, that's now gone away. I can now apply a label manually from a list of labels available to me on a Mac, on iOS, on iPadOS, on Android, on Windows, and inside a browser, which if I'm using Edge means I can pretty much do it anywhere I want to. The code that we use on Windows is built in, or we can use the AIP Unified Labeling Client if we want to do other things. Those other things might be putting a wrapper of protection around a JPEG or some other form of graphics file. Other than that, the tooling for applying a label is actually built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and Outlook on all of these platforms. And that basically means that we can allow the users to manually set a label wherever they happen to be. And that manual setting of a label is something that makes things easy for the user. But sometimes we know that when we're writing an internal document, it's always going to be something that's confidential. By adding some information to the label to say, if you see this specific text inside a document, then this is always going to be something that must be protected, something that is classified, then we can do this using the automatic labeling. We can look for date of birth and a date near it, and we can look for other text that might be around. Talking about things like date of birth, well, that's not necessarily PII, so it doesn't matter if that information gets shared out. However, if we have a date of birth and a date next to it, and we have some other information in that document, such as first name, surname, then actually we can be fairly sure that this is PII and needs to be protected. That automatic detection is now being taken further by allowing us to build a trainable classifier. Using this, we can take an example set of files and show them to the classifier. It will look through the files. It will determine within those files what it is that actually makes it important, what makes it highly confidential. From then on, we can trust it to make that determination about the files when we store it in SharePoint or OneDrive or on our local disk or in a file share, depending on what we've done with the other systems. So what does this look like when we add a label? So this is a Word document, just got some standard demonstration text in it. From the top of the Word document, I can select one of the options to allow me to assign a label: non-business, public, general, internal, or demonstration. Because this is a demonstration, if I click on demonstration, the document changes, and you can see that in this image where you can see some red text sitting as a watermark behind the text that's on the screen. That watermark is configured by me, in this case, to be red, and it just says protected. We can also see at the top of the screen that the demonstration label has been assigned, and I can have a look at the permissions that are associated with it. And in this case, because it's my document, of course, I can do everything. But if I pass this document on to somebody else, they will have a much more limited set of rights. They might be able to view the file, but not print it, not save it, and in fact be pretty much stuck with just feeding back on what the file is. We can then add to this by data loss prevention, monitoring and analyzing the data that's moving through Office 365. Because we have a label attached to the file, I can actually report on the files moving through Exchange, emailed in, emailed out. I can report on files that are shared through OneDrive to make sure that no confidential files are being shared inappropriately. When a file is copied to a SharePoint site, if the SharePoint site is public, but the file is confidential, I can get a report on that, and I can make sure that the access to those files are blocked appropriately. If we add on some of the other functionality that Microsoft bring to the table in Cloud App Security, I can also do that for Corporate Box and Dropbox and Salesforce and other systems where that API is available to us. And using the transport rules inside Exchange as part of DLP, I can make sure that no confidential documents attached to emails are actually sent out to other people. In effect, giving me a comprehensive view of exactly what files are being shared with what people and whether or not they're confidential. That allows me to get to the stage of being compliant and being able to prove it. But I'm a long way from doing the protection yet. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Matt, who will quite happily take over and be able to share his feelings on what's going on with the protection.
Welcome everybody. Dave introduced me right at the beginning. My name is Mathew Richards. So I'm going to be spending a little bit of time with you talking about some of the protection capabilities that exist within the Microsoft portfolio of security technologies. Before I jump into those, I just wanted to surface a slide that Nick presented right at the beginning, because I think this is a particularly important one just to understand. So, you know, the key things here is that Microsoft really does have a heterogeneous approach. So it's not just a Windows or a Microsoft platform. Microsoft are really focusing on those devices and platforms, etc., that exist, that are in use within organizations, things that need the experiences and the protection to work on. So, you know, there's a broad range of coverage there from Microsoft. And of course, from an AI and machine learning perspective, making sense of all of the security telemetry and other telemetry that we gather through a machine learning model is really important when we think of security, because we need to react a lot quicker than we used to have to react. You know, if we go back, you know, a number of years. So there's really, you know, the relentless attacks, the different attack vectors that are used, the different techniques. We really need to be able to surface signals across very, you know, a broad range of different telemetry information. And machine learning really helps us do that and do it at pace, and also surface those signals that are really important. And then, of course, the clear focus on identities, devices, applications, and data. Microsoft really do have a very comprehensive and capable platform that covers all of those aspects. So what does that actually look like? So what I'd like to do now is just show you something that's more than likely something that's quite common to you. So this is a very, very common attack kill chain. So this is a breach that's maybe started from a phishing email, either through a weaponized URL or an attachment, whatever it may be, and they move from left to right. So they compromise the device that the user's using. They then look to do some reconnaissance activity. Have a look around, see where the crown jewels are, if you like, the things that they're particularly looking for, whatever their specific motive is. And that involves lots of different techniques, so reconnaissance techniques, certain techniques to be able to replay users' identities. So these are things like pass the hash, pass the ticket, and there are many, many different techniques available. And then ultimately, the objective here is to gain the relevant privilege that's needed in this instance, to be able to compromise the domain. And ultimately, in this example, it's to exfiltrate some data. So, this is a very common and very widely used sort of high-level series of activities. The attack kill chain is a very, very common one and still is today. And historically, we've protected against these types of attacks through the deployment of multiple different technologies, which obviously is difficult to manage. But without that tight integration, it also presents quite a challenge to us in A, detecting things, but B, more importantly, to clean up, to be able to mitigate the risk and to get back to that safe sort of position. So from a Microsoft perspective, in this particular example, we're looking at some payload or some description that's come through an email, and through Microsoft's automated activities, both from an investigation, a containment, and remediation perspective, the risk is almost immediately mitigated. So, in this instance, we've got a URL that's a weaponized URL that if the user clicks, it has a payload at the end of it, which will potentially execute some malicious activities, and the same with the attachment. So there are lots of different protection capabilities built into this platform that protect you. What that looks like, from a sort of a process perspective, what we're looking at here is something called the automated incident response, or AIR, capability of the platform. So this is where we can look at things like URLs and attachments in emails and a whole vast array of other signals as well that then trigger a number of different automated activities. And what you're seeing on the slide here is something that is exactly what you would see in the console, really. So the result of an automated investigation response activity and what's actually happened. So we can see here a weaponized URL was detected. We confirmed that the user was compromised, and we performed a number of remediation activities here. So we blocked the URL. We deleted the email in this instance through the risk profile that user has. Now that it's compromised, that will enforce a password reset backed by multi-factor authentication. And this really is just one example of many hundreds of different playbooks that describe different investigation or investigative and remediation activities. So if we look at that attack kill chain again, but with a slightly different lens, this is quite effective in being able to understand where the different Microsoft technologies fit and what they look to protect. So again, on the left-hand side, following on from the example that I just discussed, it's Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection that in this example provided that protection and remediation capability. So that very much focuses on email, but actually not just email. It looks at data within your Office 365 tenant as well, and it includes capabilities like URL reputation checks, protection against zero-day attacks through detonation of payloads to understand what that's trying to do, etc. And then moving to the right, we've got Microsoft's EDR offering here, which in fact is far more than just an EDR, and that's Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection. So masses of investment gone into this product over the last few years, and there's no signs of that slowing down. So that's there to protect the endpoint, look at very specifically on the endpoint for malicious activities and so on and so forth, and not just your desktop. Microsoft made a recent announcement of the availability on Android and very soon iOS as well. So advanced threat protection on Microsoft Defender, advanced threat protection for those mobile platforms as well. And indeed, there's a vast coverage or comprehensive coverage of server technologies as well. And then on the right-hand side, moving further to the right, then we have a scenario where the user or the adversary here is actually inside your organization and is performing those reconnaissance activities. So we need the ability to understand what's going on, being able to see those particular activities and have the necessary optics really in order to be able to bring those things to your attention. And that's where we use Azure Advanced Threat Protection. So this very much has a clear focus on not just your local Active Directory domain and all the activities that happen against that, but also more widely into the cloud. From an identity perspective, we've got Azure Active Directory Identity Protection that looks at hundreds of different things relating to the identity and to the sign-in activity as well, in order to give you an idea of the risk profile related to that particular action or identity. So things like if the account is known to have been compromised, i.e. its username and password are available in various sources on the internet, then Azure Identity Protection will perform the relevant activities in order to protect that account, all obviously configured and controlled by yourselves. And on the far right-hand side, then, in this particular example, the particular adversaries decided they need to or they want to exfiltrate some data. So we can look at Microsoft's Cloud Access Security Broker, or CASB, which is Microsoft Cloud App Security, in order to provide that protection. Microsoft Cloud App Security, far more than just protecting the exfiltration of data. It's got a significant set of additional capabilities. So when we look at this from a much higher level, what you can see on the left-hand side here is something called Microsoft Threat Protection. So this is, I guess, relatively new. It was announced at Ignite last year, or shortly before, actually. But there's a significant movement or activity within Microsoft to really further develop this platform. And in essence, Microsoft Threat Protection is not just a collection of the technologies I just showed you on the previous slide. It's far more than that. It is indeed not just a portal. It's actually it is a portal, but it's a portal that is also a platform, for want of a better word. It has a lot of foundational components there, like integrating the various threat protection technologies so that they're all talking in real time. They can all share their intelligence together. And this is over and above what you get from the intelligent security graph, which is Microsoft's sort of broadest intelligence sharing platform across their services. This is a far tighter integration between these tools that perform detection or protection, detection, and remediation as well. So there's a whole lot of, what are typically referred to as self-healing activities that these tools can share information between them in order to remediate and clean up the particular activities that were performed. So you'll see a lot of things happening in Microsoft Threat Protection area. It is a product that does serve to reduce the amount of portals that you need to access, which I'm sure from an operational perspective will be music to your ears. No longer Microsoft's ultimate goal here is to have a single entry point into their threat protection technologies, and that will be the Microsoft Threat Protection portal. So everything that you need to do in regard to the investigative activities, the automation activities, and so on and so forth, you can do solely within that one Microsoft Threat Protection portal. Much easier, far more effective, and ultimately for your security analysts, it really does provide almost an extra member of the team, really, that performs a lot of these automated activities and investigative activities to support your overall security within the organization. On the right-hand side, then, we have Azure Security Center. So Azure Security Center is very much focused on the sort of infrastructure elements, if you like, or platform as a service elements, so IaaS and PaaS, but indeed on premises as well. So it's not just a technology that looks to protect your cloud resources and investments. It also has a significant capability for on-premises resources as well. And indeed, not just Microsoft, you know, following on from this cross-platform, this heterogeneous approach, Microsoft support pretty much any cloud platform as well. So if you've got instances in AWS, we can start bringing those in and monitor them from an activity and a security perspective. Lots of areas there to discuss. I'm not going to go into those in great detail, but the key point I wanted you to understand from this slide is that we've got these depth or specialist technologies that each have their own specific role in regard to supporting your security ambitions. So, you know, MDATP that we've mentioned, very much on a device perspective, Office 365, email, in addition to some the tenant capabilities as well, and so on and so forth. And each one of those tools specifically looks at their specific area of expertise, if you like, and then correlate and analyze that data in order to surface you know, actionable alerts. Ultimately, that's what we're all looking for, is an alert that means we need to do something rather than noise. And then, you know, the same applies to Azure Security Center. It has an element of alerting capability, as well as making sure that you're managing your posture as well within the cloud, and governance and compliance as well for those resources that you have deployed. So these are specialist depth technologies, which then, in a, you know, according to this architecture, and you know, this is the typical approach, where we then feed those that telemetry, that intelligence, into an overarching SIEM technology here, so a security incident and event management tool. And in this instance, we have you know, the Microsoft Azure Sentinel tool, which was released last year. It's gaining incredible momentum in the market. It's 100% sort of cloud-based, and has significant automation and orchestration capabilities built into it. So we've got these depth specialist tools reporting into Azure Sentinel, and then Azure Sentinel adds another layer of visibility then to that data by bringing in things like network appliance or device security, telemetry, through to a whole vast array of additional data sources. So we're ingesting lots of information. And then Azure Sentinel, through its extensive machine learning capability, or AI, can then perform further correlation across those security optics, if you like, in order to give you that really clear end-to-end attack kill chain. So it's bringing in all of the relevant pieces of your infrastructure and your environment, and being able to correlate against those in order to identify those particularly or those specific activities that require attention, that may be malicious or suspicious. So we'll spend a little bit of time now just digging into Azure Sentinel. So as I mentioned, Azure Sentinel is Microsoft's SIEM offering. It was released back last year in September, late September. So it's actually based on some very mature, robust, and solid foundations, which I'll talk about shortly. But in essence, it's because of the nature that it's a cloud-based service. It does not require any specific on-premises or infrastructure components on the whole. To be clear, there are one or two components, depending on where you need to ingest data, that you may need to deploy certain log collectors to feed Azure Sentinel with the security telemetry, but the service itself is 100% cloud-based. And therefore, to enable and activate the product, it's incredibly straightforward, and really does deliver some value immediately upon activation of the product. So it's very easy to hook up a number of different data sources, and we'll talk in a little more detail about that on the next slide. From a scale perspective, then you need not worry about this. You know, if you're currently running an on-premises SIEM technology, then you need to consider all sorts of things like processing all the relevant resources that that particular SIEM instance needs, as well as, you know, significant storage as well. So, you know, and you need to manage that from a capacity perspective and look at, you know, how you can accommodate the growth of that product. All of that's taken away for you with a cloud service, as you would expect. So, you know, Microsoft will scale all of that and make it performant and capable of consuming the relevant amount of data that you provide to it without you having to do anything. It's just a data repository that you throw information at, in essence. And then I've alluded to this already, significant amount of AI and machine learning capability in the product. You know, this is really where Azure Sentinel excels, to be honest, in being able to analyze and process the information that you feed it to surface the relevant security insights that you need. So as with any SIEM, you need the ability to be able to collect information. You need the ability then to make sense of that information by performing analytics or maybe some manual hunting exercises, ultimately to be able to detect certain scenarios or instances where we believe or the system believes that some suspicious or malicious activities are happening. From an investigative perspective, we need the ability, obviously, for the product to raise incidents so that we can focus our attention on these. And Sentinel, you know, has that concept within it. So an incident may be based on a number of different alerts, but it indicates a series of activities ultimately that when looked upon as a whole, depict a series of suspicious activities. And then on the far right-hand side, Sentinel's capability here to be able to respond, both from an automation and orchestration perspective, is significant. So again, based on some solid, mature technologies from Microsoft, that have been out for many, many years. So Sentinel will leverage those technologies in order to provide you the ability to respond accordingly. Now, you know, in the ideal world, what we'd like to do is to be able to respond to a particular security incident and mitigate that risk immediately. That's common in some cases. It is difficult across the board, and it's you know, it's something that requires careful attention. Significant capability here, as I say, within the platform to perform a number of those activities, but other uses are for orchestration or management of the life cycle of that incident. So if you need to integrate with third-party tools to provide management, the whole end-to-end management of that incident, then we can perform those activities through the playbooks capability of Sentinel, and actually help your analysts as well to complement the incidents that Sentinel raises with additional information. So, you know, there may be some additional lookups that you need to do internally when you get an incident that may be indicating a suspicious travel or impossible travel. Then you can perform some automated activities to validate, well, is this user or the objects or identities within this incident, are they known? Is it expected that they've gone to this particular other location, let's say, or other aspects relating to that? And you can perform some validation and checks ahead of an analyst actually needing to spend time on it. So very, very powerful. What we'll do now is just look a little bit more detail into these areas. So a SIEM really is all about collection to start with. You know, the SIEM can't do anything unless you feed it quality data, and that really needs to be comprehensive in its capability, and that's exactly what you should expect from Azure Sentinel. So its ability to consume information is far-reaching. So we, as an organization, Third Space, have not really come across any scenario to date. We work very heavily and closely with Sentinel with a number of different clients. You know, as long as there's an interface of some description, there's an ability to consume the information or security information from that. The key thing here is that, you know, in a Microsoft ecosystem, so if you were to use some of the technologies that I talked about previously, then hooking those up into Sentinel is literally no more than a tick in a box. It is literally that simple. Take you no more than sort of 10 seconds really to get to the right place in the portal, tick the box, and then you've initiated a service-to-service integration. Very, very, very simple. There's a whole raft of first-party connectors that exist within within Sentinel, so the ability to hook into all of those vendors that you can see on the screen there. This list is growing on a day-by-day basis, but you should also expect to be able to consume from, the regular sources, things like syslog, Ceph, and various iterations of those. But where there's an interface, there's a mechanism to be able to consume that information. And of course, as I've mentioned already, it's not just the Azure platform. If you've got infrastructure on other cloud platforms, then Sentinel has actually a closer or a more integrated capability to consume security telemetry from those platforms, not just from the instances that you have running on there, but also from the security fabric that those cloud platforms operate. So Sentinel, really is, or has rather a comprehensive list of data ingestion capabilities. So once that's been ingested, that goes into a repository. And in this example, as I alluded to before, we're going into something called a log analytics workspace. Now, log analytics has been something that's been in use heavily and widely used globally for many, many years. It's an extremely extensible, performant database that allows you to throw all sorts of data at it, and importantly, be able to process and query that information very, very quickly. So, really important to have that solid repository, and that's what we get with log analytics. What Sentinel then does on top of that data that's stored within the repository is perform a number of, advanced activities or advanced analytics. So things like looking at user and entity behavioral analytics, machine models, very a key focus in Sentinel. So looking at what is normal for these users and entities within the data repository, what sort of activities are normal, and when we see something that may be outside of that normal, then that might trigger some additional activities to perform some investigation. And there's a whole raft of other things, as well as having what we think of really as traditional rules. These are sort of analytic rules within Sentinel, based on a common query language that allows you to surface all sorts of different scenarios from the data repository that is log analytics. And what you get when you enable Sentinel is a whole lot of intelligence and capability out of the box. So there are hundreds of analytic rules, hundreds of what we call workbooks, which are those components that allow you to visualize the data that exists within the repository. So looking at trends, looking at numbers of activities, and looking at that from a future perspective. What the number of events I'm collecting, is this on an increase? Have we seen a spike in that? All that sort of stuff. And then in the middle here, to support your investigative activities, the hunting capability in Sentinel is really comprehensive. So you have the ability to query that data that exists within the repository based on a whole raft of out-of-the-box hunting queries, things that you may want to run on a periodic basis as part of an investigation, or maybe a proactive hunting exercise, as well as supporting something called Jupyter. So Jupyter is an industry technology or platform that's been used in the security world for many years, but allows you to really describe some complex investigative and hunting activities in a document format. Allows you to invest time to develop them, and then the reusability of those Jupyter notebooks are really key to supporting your analyst in their activities in reviewing what Sentinel in this instance provides. The playbooks are Sentinel's automation capabilities. So this is based on, again, a sort of mature technology that exists within the Azure platform, and that is logic apps. So if you're familiar with logic apps, you'll be familiar with playbooks. And these are this is Sentinel's mechanism in order to provide automation and orchestration to support your specific needs. Again, huge amounts of connectivity capability. In fact, we can use logic apps as well in some instances to facilitate data ingestion as well, for those things that have very specific requirements in that area. And on the far right-hand side, then we have Sentinel's ability to integrate with additional systems and services. So I've mentioned Sentinel's orchestration capability, which is about orchestrating that security incident and all the activities that happen within you know, of the activities that happen within investigation of that incident, then we can orchestrate that in a way that maybe raises a ticket in ServiceNow if you've got or another security incident system management system, and manage the life cycle of that ticket. That might be manipulating the ticket during certain activities through the investigation period. It could also mean, you know, communicating out to teams, emailing the relevant groups, making sure that we're keeping on top of that people are acknowledging things, right through to triggering a whole load of automated activities to either complement or enrich the incidents that Sentinel raises, as well as mitigating and remediating risks, you know, or incidents where we can. A whole host of community support for this product. Microsoft publish all of their IP in relation to Sentinel, so all the workbooks, notebooks, analytic rules, playbooks into a GitHub repository. And there's a huge community support there. And what you'll see is people contributing different Sentinel artifacts, if you like, that have proven useful for them. And it's very much developing into a shared platform. So what you'll find really when you deploy Sentinel is a wide range of artifacts that will either suit you straight away, or you can use as a basis to customize for your specific needs. Okay, so the next thing that I'd like to talk to you about is our current state assessment, something that is very much focused on helping you understand what your current security posture is. And this, you know, Nick alluded to right at the beginning, and well, not alluded to, very clearly communicated that zero trust is an absolutely top of the list thing that we should all be looking at. You know, that really is a strategy and approach that can help us react to all sorts of different scenarios, you know, not only what we've just been going through and are still going through, but a whole raft of other things. And the CSA, our current state assessment, is something that can really help in that area. So in essence, it's a strategic engagement that allows us to work with you to surface the areas of your environment that require attention, in essence. So we're identifying those gaps within your environment. We do that through conducting various assessments at the beginning. So these are based on one or two workshops, as well as a whole range of programmatic assessments as well. What we'll look at specifically here is your Microsoft 365 tenant, and make sure that you have that tenant configured appropriately, and that you're not leaving anything exposed. So a really important exercise. And the output of that exercise then is twofold. So we provide a written report, a detailed report that provides the rationale behind what we're recommending, and gives it to you in lots and lots of different sort of views. So we can give you a view of its risk posture, its impact to the business if you were to implement it, the impact to the end user, its technological complexity, etc., etc. And I'll show you some of those in the dashboard in a minute. And mentioning the dashboard is the other deliverable here, something that allows you to interact with the data that we've collected to in essence slice and dice it in ways that you want to see the data to support any specific strategies or initiatives internally. And that really does promote a strategic engagement with us, so that once we've done the assessment with you, we'll work very closely with you to help understand how we can mitigate ultimately the risks that we've identified. And we have a really flexible strategic engagement process that we can put in place to work with you and help you sort of address those specific areas, ultimately with a view to remediating those challenges. So I've talked about a lot of this already. The key thing here is that we're not just looking at certain configuration within your tenant. We're actually, performing some workshops to better understand what your current cybersecurity strategy is, your challenges, your priorities, and we'll blend that with what we discover in your environment in order to give you then that very specific customized report that is relevant to you, that allows you to see where you need to focus your attention. And as I mentioned, it does promote a continuous sort of strategic engagement, whether you engage with us or whether you engage internally within your respective organizations in order to ultimately address the recommendations in there. It's a great vehicle for communicating with your senior management, so board level people. There are some nice diagrams and indications of risk, which is the sort of language and format that that level those level of individuals prefer, and also provide some really useful business case content in order to promote additional budget potentially for security. So just quickly, I just wanted to go through, give you a view of what the dashboard is. So what you're looking at here is the sort of top level page. Obviously, this is based on a fictitious company. We can see it analyzed in terms of the MITRE attack framework. So we can see sort of the risk areas there, as well as a spider diagram there showing very clearly where, the majority of the risk lies. But we want you to be able to slice and dice the information as well, which I'll come on to in a minute. But if we were to click on one of those MITRE attack components, then we can see and drill down and filter accordingly on those relevant areas. But if you wanted to slice and dice the data in a way that you wanted to, then you should use our recommendations explorer here. This allows you to do all sorts of things. So in this particular example here, I've filtered on show me the recommendations that are not requiring, let's say, an E5 uplift, that have a low technical effort for deployment. They have a low operational impact for their use, a low end user impact. And that really could be your low hanging fruit, right? Things that you're able to grasp and move forward with very, very quickly. So ultimately, it's a vehicle to allow you to to be able to see the data in a way that's important to you. And finally, what we do as part of the many assessments that we perform is also look at your local Active Directory identities. So we'll give you some idea of the level of risk that the passwords within that directory are presenting to you as an organization. So this is not necessarily compromised users. These are passwords that your users are using that have already been compromised and therefore likely to be used in some sort of dictionary or programmatic attack, things that are easily reverse engineered. So this we find providing very useful information. Let's quickly move on to some typical next steps. I think I've already mentioned this as well. Our current and state assessment, if you're interested in that, please reach out to us. We'll happily talk to you in more detail about it. In fact, there's a handout as well, I think, that you can download from within the GoToWebinar client that will allow you to understand a little more detail, but please reach out if you want to understand more. So I guess at this point, we have the opportunity for you to answer or ask rather any questions. You've got myself, Dave Guest, and Nick Lyons on the line. I can see one or two that have already come in. There's a question here about MTP and what license is needed for that. Let me answer that one quickly. So MTP isn't a license. In essence, if you license one of the components that comprise MTP, Microsoft Threat Protection, then that will automatically light up the MTP portal. So it's not separate, it's integrated and really does provide significant value over looking at each product separately from an operations perspective. Let me have a look to see if there's any other questions. Okay, Dave, can you see anything there?
No, I think given that we're at 12 o'clock as well, it's probably worth bringing this to a close. Okay. Any questions that we haven't got to that have been answered, been asked in the GoToWebinar, we will get back to each of you with the individual answers.
Fantastic. Okay, so I guess the last thing to say is just a big thank you. Thanks for taking the time out today to join us on this webinar. We truly hope it's been valuable and useful, even if there's just one or two sort of nuggets of information that have been valuable to you, and please do reach out. We're really happy to help, have some early conversations, give you some pointers of where to go. There's a lot of a lot of technology that we've shared with you here, so we're really happy to help you understand that appropriately to take best advantage of it. But once again, thank you very much. And with that, we'll draw the webinar to a close.